Today's talk is on the precept, I vow not to misuse sexuality. When I was preparing for this talk, I found that I had a lot to say. So let's dive in and see what comes up today. This is a very rich precept, and I really want to start by the reminder that with the Bodhisattva precepts and the development of our ethical practice, the ethical part of our practice, it can't be based on just on outside in. It can't be based just on a set of rules that somebody else tells us. That's very important, and I don't want to diminish that. That's crucial because, the set of so-called, they're not really rules, they're guidelines for ethical living. These set of rules come to us out of the deep practice of generations of Buddhas and ancestors. So they don't come, out of somebody's intellect or something that somebody made up. And likewise, we shouldn't meet them that way. We shouldn't meet the precepts based on our own intellect or our own interpretation. We should meet the precepts with the width of all the Buddhas and ancestors and the depth of our Zazen practice. Really engage with them from the inside out. So equally important as the teachings from the outside in, is meeting those teachings from the inside out. And this requires deeply engaging with them through our practice. Really letting go of our own ideas, our own ego, and letting the practice naturally arise without any me to get in the way. So these guidelines or standards or rules, if you want, for morality, for ethical living, can't be based on the premise that they're a social necessity only. We also have to have the proper development of our own practice to meet them. Otherwise, they're empty, they're meaningless if we don't make them our own. So I'm hoping that with today's talk, we can really engage in that way. Oh, these aren't me telling you something. These are the Dharma speaking, the Dharma that comes from my mouth, speaking to the Dharma that you already know in your own hearts, in your own practice. So try to hear with that mind. As with all the precepts, the precept of not misusing sexuality must show up in how we're living our life. As long as it's a concept or an idea, and if it doesn't match how we're actually living, then that's where we need to do the work. So let's try to find that place. That edge is really where the practice has the most beauty and depth. It's always shifting a little bit. And that's why with practice, we're always growing and stretching. So if you ever think at any point, oh, I got this, I understand it, I would encourage you to let that go and push a little more. If you think I understand, then there's still this, I in the middle. So really let the precepts teach you from the inside out. The precept of sexuality is especially rich because it speaks to our wanting to connect with the entire universe, of course, but we often seek that in another human being. And I think that's a very strong motivation for sex. It's just connection. And that motivation may be wholesome or unwholesome, but that desire for connection is something that we all have. And sometimes we can get a little bit in looking for that in only one person. We can lose sight of the fact that that connection, not just with people, but with everything in the universe, is readily available to us if we get ourselves out of the way. So practicing the precept of not misusing sexuality is also about healing. Really coming into a healing and wholesome and mutually respectful relationship with ourselves, with our communities, and with the world around us. So as with all of the precepts, they each feed on each other. So likewise, the precept of sexuality must be based in not harming, not killing. It requires not taking what is not given. It requires honesty and truthfulness and not misusing intoxicants. These things inform us. So if we get too narrow and we're kind of stuck about, I'm not sure if this is misusing sexuality or not, then try looking at the other precepts as a way in. Okay, I'm not sure, but am I being truthful? Am I following the guidelines for being truthful? Am I using right speech? Is this the right time? Do I speak in a way that's gentle and not harsh? Is this beneficial or necessary? And do I act out of goodwill and with a kind heart? Those things can help us if we feel a little bit stuck, because it does take a constant engagement, as with all the precepts. But I think this one is often particularly tricky because of our desire for connection, which can be confused with just physical desire. We really want that connection with other humans. And it's such a driving force in our life that it has a lot of power. So this enormous power of sexuality can easily go astray. So how do we bring together this merging of bodies and, I guess, spirit, if you will, in a way that's loving, mutually respective, and based in connection that doesn't harm but benefits each person? This is the challenge. So, I'm not giving you a set of rules. Do this, don't do this, do this, don't do this. I think you really have to engage. We all have to really engage. But at its core, don't misuse sexuality. Very simple. In other words, treat each other with mutual respect, with honesty, and with a feeling of gratitude and love. If those things are absent in your connections around sexuality, then put a question mark there. You don't have to beat yourself up. You don't have to decide, oh no, I'm bad. This is terrible. I can't believe. No, put a question mark there and ask yourself. Do a gut check. This is a very powerful way to understand. Check in with your intuition. Does this feel okay? Does this feel right? Am I hurting someone else? Am I taking what's not given? Even, I don't mean overtly even. And if one of those things is off, then maybe it's not the right time. Like I said, there's so much I want to say about this one. Let's talk about energies a little. Our energies have to be in balance, and energy can manifest in many different ways. Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh talks a little bit about traditional Asian understandings of energy in terms of sexual, the breath, and our spirit energy. So sexual energy is a very strong energy, and it's one that often comes up in our practice. And if you've sat, especially for those of us who have sat sesshin, a longer retreat, silent retreat, we often notice that when we're really stilling our mind and our energy starts to grow, what comes up is enormous sexual energy. And I think this is so confusing for so many people. We're like, what is this? I don't understand. Where is this coming from? And I think that's, this enormous energy that can manifest as sexual energy comes out of a connection. So our spiritual energy can easily be sort of channeled into that way, that mode of being, because that's the most known to us. That's the most accessible. That's something we're familiar with. Oh, connection means sex. Of course, it's not that overt, but that's our habit pattern. So when that happens with our practice, we can train ourselves to rechannel that enormous energy, that very strong force of energy back into our practice to really fuel our practice. And in doing that, we have to do so carefully. If we're in retreat, obviously that's not a time that we're going to be having sex. So it's a really good place to practice that when it comes up. I don't want to be too absolutist, but I will guess that I won't say there is nobody, but I'll say it's a very common phenomena to fall in love with somebody during sesshin or during retreats. They look like the most beautiful person in the universe, and why have I never noticed them before? We must have a deep karmic connection. Oh my goodness, look at this. And what I want to offer is use that as a window. If those eyes see that person as the most beautiful human in the universe, take those same eyes and look at a tree. And you may just see the most beautiful tree in the entire universe. And look up. You may just see the most beautiful sky you've ever noticed in your life. And look at another person. The grandma sitting next to you may just be the most beautiful grandma you've ever seen in your life. Stretch out. Don't let it take over, but really give it space, using your breath and also the balance of your energy of concentration. Sexual energy can really pull us out of our concentration very quickly. So when that happens, if we follow our breath and pull in our concentration, then that energy also, rather than being channeled outwards as it often wants to be, can be channeled into our spiritual practice and be beneficial for our awakening, which is why we're all here, right? It's a very strong energy, and we can often get swept away by it. But, it happens to everybody. So let's just normalize that. It's something that's very normal and human. And as with everything in our practice, it's good to recognize it when you feel that happening, to develop the ability to recognize it. Because as I started off by saying, sexuality has so much power. Sexual energy has so much power. And we have to use that energy very carefully if we don't want to harm, but want to benefit all beings. I bookmarked today a passage by Roshi Norman Fisher, which I thought I really like the way that he explores this precept. So I wanted to share that with you for a little bit. So I'm going to start with what I was just talking about, and then I'll return to another theme in a minute. Sexuality has the power to hurt us as almost nothing else can. Our stability and tranquility can suddenly be upset, much to our shock and utter surprise, by the strength of sexual feelings that rise up fiercely out of nowhere, compelling us to do deeds we never thought we'd do. We have all seen this happen to others, if not to ourselves, and certainly we are made aware of it constantly in the movies, on television, and magazines, and in books. And even more disturbing is rape, incest, child abuse, and sexual debasement of all kinds, and the generations of cover-up for those. No human tragedy evokes as emotional a response as sexual crimes, which occur everywhere, even within our temples and churches, our schools, our professions. And then there are the less traumatic, but almost countless ways in which we hurt each other every day with our sexual advances and suggestions. A boss's inappropriate joke, a touch, a boyfriend's intimidating sexual need, a wife's rejection of he says an amorous husband, or vice versa. The gestures in the street, the stares. These are the ways that the beautiful energy of sexuality can be used to cause harm. So I want to address that a little bit. The enormous power of sexual energy, this pleasure, this sense of fulfillment, again, of connection with each other, can also carry enormous hurt, shame, fear, feelings of inadequacy, aggression, even our identity. So how do we use this powerful, beautiful energy in ways that help, that connect, and do not harm? This is the key question. And because power is such an integral part of this, let's talk about that for a minute. It is never appropriate for a teacher, a Buddhist teacher, or any clergy to have sex with a congregant or a temple member or their student. And the main thing here is the power imbalance. It's never appropriate. And it's up to the teacher to hold that. But if you're the student, then you also have a responsibility to hold that. Because you get to be in charge of your own body. So knowing that that's inappropriate, you can say no. And it's still the teacher's responsibility not to act on that impulse, no matter who it comes from. So we all have our own personhood, if you will, and that can never be diminished, our own Buddha nature. So understanding what's appropriate and what's not is also our responsibility as a community. So that's what I wanted to start off by saying. It's never appropriate for a teacher to have sex with a student. It causes enormous harm, as I think many of us have seen, not only to the one person, but the ripples just go so far. They just keep going for years and years and years to the whole community. An entire spiritual community can feel deeply wounded by the inappropriate actions of a teacher, whether or not that relationship was consensual. let's not cause harm in this way. Let's support each other in not allowing that harm to come up. And likewise, there are other situations, of course, where somebody's in power. Of course, your boss shouldn't make inappropriate comments to you, or shouldn't hit on you, or shouldn't have sex with you. If you are in a community with a board of directors, it is completely inappropriate for a board member to make sexual advances or to say inappropriate things to a member. And this happens too. And sometimes it happens all in the same mix. So then what do? We have to take a step back. We have to take a step back from our fury, from our desire, from our greed, from our confusion, and get a little bit more perspective and maybe get help from a neutral outside person who can see clearly. Again, because so much harm can be caused. So much harm. Let's return to Norman Fisher's book. I am amazed at sexuality's power and at our fascination with it, both far out of proportion to the amount of time that we actually spend directly indulging in sexual activity. The realm of sexuality can have disturbing inner reverberations at times. It awakens not only our need for pleasure and fulfillment, but also our sense of shame, inadequacy, identity, fear, aggression, obsession. Sexuality is also a way to transcend the desert island of the isolated self and join in some profound way with the life of another. Sexuality holds the promise of self-transcendence and self-surrender. Are we ready for this? Are we whole enough to endure it? For some, the sexual quest is a spiritual journey that can be deeply satisfying, as almost nothing else in our life is. I was really struck by that because his calling out of the amount of time that we spend thinking about sex. Think of our zazen practice alone. When we sit zazen, we sit in silence. We turn our attention inwards. We focus on our breath. And yet, what takes over? We're not even connecting with it. We're not even engaged with another human. And yet these thoughts come up and just take over. So when he talks about the amount of time that thoughts of sexuality occupy our minds, our energies, our hearts, compared to the amount of time that we actually are engaging in sex, it's hugely disproportionate, right? And I think this speaks to the amount of power that it holds and the strength of our desire for connection with each other. A desire for connection that comes out of our innate knowledge that we are interconnected. I remember some years ago being in a silent practice period for a good chunk of time. And I was at a monastery that was celibate, at least for the time of the practice period, as most of them are. When we start the practice period, we all take vows, lay people and monastics, and agree to a period of time of celibacy. So we had been practicing for, I guess, maybe 2 weeks, 10 days. And somebody came in late to that practice period. They'd had something going on that prevented them from being there on time. And it was a person with a lot of stature. It was one of the teachers. And that particular teacher was in a very new relationship. Their tradition, their Buddhist tradition, is one that's not celibate. They were in a beautiful, mutually beneficial relationship with another human being, and they were in love. They were deeply in love, and they oozed sex from every pore of their bodies, which we do, right, when we're in love. So in that sense, it was very beautiful to see. And in that setting, it was also very inappropriate. What I observed is a very stable, settled practice environment get really stirred up. I even recall one woman coming to speak with me, and she usually is attracted to women, and she was so confused because she was so attracted to this one man whom she didn't know was gay also. And I just use that as an example for how confusing that stirring up was for everybody. She couldn't stop thinking about this man who couldn't stop thinking about another person who could, and that's how it went. The whole place kind of just erupted in sexual energy from these, I think, from the two who came in and brought that with them. So one of the two who came in was a friend, and I decided to talk to them about it very gently. And they listened to me, amazingly, because when you're in love, it's kind of hard to listen to somebody. And I was like, I'm so happy for you. I'm so happy that you're in a partnership. It's so beautiful. And the two of you coming in, with this strong energy is really permeating the whole atmosphere of the retreat. And I'm wondering if, they would kind of casually touch each other. They weren't kissing or anything. And I'm wondering if you might keep that energy outside of the bounds of the retreat. And my friend was really surprised and took it very seriously. Oh my goodness, I can't believe, oh wow, that I didn't mean to affect everyone like that, but I can see what you're saying. And then from that time on, they were staying outside of the bounds of the retreat, but they would keep that energy out. And I use that as an example, for how much it stirs people up, but also how we can create intention around it. We don't have to let it drive everything we do. I often ask people when they come to the temple, not to, and especially when people are newly in love, they just can't stop touching each other. But if you're in that state and you look around, often what you'll see is somebody who's really sad because they want that for themselves. So it accentuates the lack. And it's not your fault. But if we're in a mutually supportive relationship as a community, it doesn't belong in the temple. Hold hands, kiss, love each other, but not in the practice space. And don't bring the sexual banter into the practice space either. It's not the right place for it. It might seem funny, and it makes others uncomfortable. And because something is witty doesn't mean that it's okay. It's just not the right time and place. Our purpose in the practice community in our Zazen is to wake up for the benefit of all beings. And if in any way we're using any of our practice energy in a way that causes harm or hurt to others, even accidentally, then we need to re-examine how we use that energy. Our strongest desire is for connection. Connection. Let's stretch that sense of connection beyond our one person to the entire universe. Honoring the relationships that we have with love, with honesty, with mutual understanding, and even with gratitude for what this person brings to our life. At the same time that we honor our connection with everything in the universe. Thank you.